People like to believe morality is simple, that good choices are always available, and bad ones are only made by bad people. I believed that, too, until life cornered me. When desperation knocks hard enough, it doesn't ask permission. It breaks the door down. My name is Eleanor Hayes. I'm 78 years old now. If you're listening to my story, I ask only one thing: listen until the end before judging. What I'm about to share stayed buried for more than 4 decades. Not because I was proud, but because I was afraid no one would understand why I did what I did. It all began in the early 1970s. I was just 25, with 3 children clinging to my skirts and a husband I trusted without question. Tom, as my husband, claimed he sold agricultural equipment. He left for business trips, returned tired, and talked about the future we'd build together. I believed every word. Then one afternoon, I came home from the market to a house that no longer felt like mine. The furniture was gone, the savings, hidden beneath the mattress, gone. My mother's jewelry, my cookware, even the were gone. All that remained was a single note on the kitchen table. I can't do this anymore. Don't look for me. That was it. No apology, no explanation, just absence. I'm sorry. That night, my children and I slept in the barn. By morning, I understood something clearly. No one was coming to save us. With no money, no support, and no education beyond high school, I took whatever work I could find. A boarding house owner offered me a tiny back room in exchange for endless labor scrubbing floors, washing sheets, cleaning rooms. At night, I sewed clothes until my fingers bled, barely sleeping. Even with all that, it wasn't enough. Then my eldest son, Daniel, got sick. The doctor said pneumonia. He said medication. He said money. As I watched my child struggle to breathe, something inside me broke, and something dangerous took its place. I promised myself I would do anything to keep my children alive, and that promise would soon lead me down a path I never imagined. A path where one lie became a doorway to another life. I didn't know it yet, but the next choice I made would split my life in two and begin a secret that would last for years. When people talk about life moments, they imagine dramatic scenes, accidents, deaths, sudden fortunes. For me, it was a quiet conversation at the end of a long hallway in a cheap boarding house. That's where I met Harold Macy. He was a widower in his early 50s, owned a modest grocery store in a nearby town, and stayed at the boarding house. Whenever he came to buy supplies, he noticed my children first, how thin they were, how quietly they sat, how they never asked for anything. Then he noticed me. At first, it was small kindnesses, extra fruit, a warm loaf of bread that would go bad anyway. He paid for Daniel's medicine without making a show of it. I told myself it was charity, nothing more. But charity doesn't last forever, especially when pride gets involved. One evening, after the children had fallen asleep, Harold spoke plainly. "A woman like you shouldn't be fighting the world alone," he said. "You need stability, a home, a man who can provide." I knew what he was offering before he said it out loud. He didn't speak of love, he spoke of partnership, of shared meals and quiet evenings, of my children having a roof over their heads and food on the table. He said he wanted a wife, someone to keep the house, manage meals, and stand beside him in town. I wish I could say I struggled with the decision longer, but desperation doesn't allow long debates. I agreed under one condition: I would continue sewing to earn my own money. He accepted, though I could tell he didn't love the idea. When we moved to his town, I didn't use my full name. I introduced myself as Ella, a shortened version of my middle name. It felt harmless at the time, just a small distance between my past and my present. Living with Harold brought safety, but it also brought control. He tracked every expense, questioned every errand, and reminded me often that my survival depended on him. I smiled, nodded, and endured. Behind his back, I saved what little money I could from sewing, coins hidden inside fabric rolls, bills tucked into old pattern books, a secret fund for emergencies. For a while, life stabilized. The children went to school. Daniel's health improved. We ate full meals. I slept without fear of eviction or hunger. But safety has a way of demanding more. Medical bills returned. School costs grew. Shoes wore out. And Harold's generosity had limits. Every request came with suspicion. Every need came with reminders of debt. That's when an unexpected opportunity appeared. A sewing client from another town mentioned well-paying work, formal dresses, fittings, cash payments. The only requirement was travel. I told Harold I needed special fabric. He believed me. And with that single excuse, my life quietly began to divide. I thought I was just earning extra money, but in the next town, someone would see me as a completely different woman and offer me a future I couldn't afford to refuse. The first time I traveled to the neighboring town for sewing work, I told myself it was temporary, just a way to catch up on bills. Just a few dresses, a few fittings, nothing more. The lie was easier to believe than the truth. The town was larger, livelier, and filled with people who didn't know me at all. There, I wasn't Harold's quiet wife with tired eyes and plain dresses. I introduced myself as Celia, young widow starting over, chasing independence with needle and thread, and my sewing work spread quickly. Women talked. Orders grew. Money came in, real money, the kind I hadn't seen in years. For the first time since my husband abandoned us, I felt something close to control. That's where I met Robert Lane. Robert owned a small shoe workshop. He was confident, charming, and 10 years younger than Harold. He admired my ambition, my story, and my strength. I never corrected the assumptions he made. Letting him believe I was alone felt easier than explaining the truth. He asked questions about my past, my dreams, my plans. I answered carefully, too carefully. Within months, Robert proposed marriage. When he asked, my heart didn't leap. There was no romance, only calculation. To homes meant more stability, to incomes meant safety, to men meant my children would never go hungry again. I told myself it wasn't betrayal, it was survival. Created a routine so precise it felt military. 3 days with Harold, 3 days with Robert, 1 day shopping for supplies, which was really for planning, rest, and adjusting stories. The children stayed in a church-run boarding school during the week, paid for by Harold, who believed it was charity. I visited them twice weekly, switching names, wardrobes, and attitudes depending on which man I was with. With Harold, I was quiet and obedient, hair tied back, plain dresses. With Robert, I was muddy and confident, loose hair, stylish clothes. I sewed myself. The hardest part wasn't remembering names or schedules. It was the guilt at night, lying beside men who believed they knew me. I stared at the ceiling and whispered apologies into the dark. Then I pictured my children healthy, fed, safe, and told myself the price was worth it. For nearly a year, the system worked, but control is an illusion, and cracks were already forming. Harold's business began to suffer. His patience thinned, his voice hardened. Meanwhile, Robert grew possessive, calling constantly, questioning absences. I began to realize something terrifying. I wasn't balancing 2 lives. 2 lives were the limit. But Sue, a third man, would enter my world, and with him a risk I could no longer manage. By the time the 2nd year passed, I was no longer pretending this was temporary. It was 2 towns, 2 names, 2 men, and one constant fear that one wrong step would bring everything crashing down. Harold's world was shrinking. A poor harvest season hit the farming communities, and with it, his grocery business began to suffer. Money grew tight. His kindness vanished. In its place came resentment. He counted every coin, questioned every purchase, and then, one night, he crossed a line I can never forget. I questioned his drinking. He answered with his hand. The slap sent me to the floor. My ears rang. My cheek burned. He stood over me, breathing heavily, reminding me who paid the bills, who saved me and my children. That night, I locked myself in the bedroom with the kids and cried silently, pressing my hand over my mouth so they wouldn't hear the end. So did I, because survival doesn't always allow confrontation. In the other town, Robert was changing too, but in a different way. His affections sharpened into obsession. He wanted to know where I was at all times. He called repeatedly. He questioned every delay, every excuse. It's ads, single quotes, as when fate introduced a third man. I met Samuel Ortega at a fabric trade fair in another town entirely. He was a merchant, warm, expressive, and endlessly talkative. To him, I became calm, a seamstress with Spanish roots. I even adjusted my accent slightly, a detail that still fills me with shame. Samuel admired creativity, freedom, beauty. He didn't monitor me, he didn't strike me, but he was intensely jealous, always watching, always suspicious of invisible rivals. When he asked me to move in and help manage his fabric shop, I saw something dangerous and necessary. An escape. A third life meant I could reduce time with Harold. It meant distance from violence. It meant options. I adjusted the routine again. 2 days with each man, 1 day for planning and recovery. The children stayed longer at school. I told myself it was for stability. In truth, it was because I couldn't let them see the cracks forming in me. The guilt deepened. I began waking at night, gasping for air, dreaming of crowds, shouting my names, different names all at once. In some dreams, my children were pulled away while I stood frozen, unable to move. To protect us, I started saving aggressively. A secret bank account in yet another town, a small piece of land, a dream of a house where no one would ask who I was married to. I told myself this was temporary, but lies grow heavier the longer you carry them, and soon the weight would become unbearable. I believed 3 lives were already too many, but I was about to make the mistake that would turn my survival plan into a prison and multiply everything beyond control. By the time I added a third life, I had stopped asking myself if what I was doing was right. The only question that mattered was whether my children were safe. I lived by schedules scribbled on scraps of paper and memorized bus routes better than prayers. Every bag I carried held different clothes. Every town knew a different version of me. I changed hairstyles, accents, even posture depending on who I was supposed to be. And still it wasn't enough. The money I saved grew slowly, but not fast enough to guarantee a clean escape. My children were getting older. They were starting to notice patterns, ask questions I wasn't ready to answer. Then I met Edward Collins. Edward was a technical school instructor in a town where I opened the bank account for my secret savings. We met through conversations, books, ideas, dreams. He admired intelligence more than appearance. To him, I was Regina, a widowed school teacher rebuilding her life. With Edward, I tasted something dangerous, respect. He spoke to me as an equal, asked my opinions, introduced me proudly. I wasn't just surviving, I was seen. When he asked for commitment, I said yes before fear could stop me. By then, I was living 4 different lives, 4 names, 4 homes, 4 wardrobes, 4 versions of my soul. The routine became brutal, a day and a half with each man. Constant travel, constant vigilance. One mistake could expose everything. Exhaustion was relentless. I lost weight, my hair thinned, my hands trembled. Sometimes I woke up unsure of where I was or what name to answer to. I began carrying small notes in my purse to remind myself which identity belonged to which town. The children felt the distance. My oldest started asking why I disappeared so often. I told them stories about a dangerous ex-husband, about hiding, about protection. Thought each lie cut deeper than the last. Guilt settled into my bones. Prayed for forgiveness I didn't believe I deserved. At night, I begged God to keep my secret just a little longer, long enough for my children to grow, to escape the chaos I created. But secrets don't last forever, and the more carefully you build them, the more violently they collapse. By the end of the decade, I knew something terrible was coming. I felt it in my body, in my dreams, in the way fear followed me even in daylight. I was no longer controlling the lies. They were controlling me. I didn't realize I was already standing on the edge until one unexpected moment changed everything and made hiding impossible. By the time the new decade arrived, I was barely holding myself together. 4 lives demanded more than I could give. Travel exhausted me. Lies piled up faster than I could remember them. And worst of all, my body began to betray me. At first I ignored the signs of miscycle. Nausea in the mornings. Fatigue so deep it felt like drowning. IWT deep down, I already knew. When the truth became undeniable, panic replaced every other emotion. I was pregnant at 33 with 4 different men in 4 different towns. Pregnancy wasn't just a complication, it was a catastrophe. I counted dates again and again, desperately trying to narrow down the possibilities. The truth was unbearable. The child could only belong to Edward or Samuel. Either way, There was no future where I could keep my secret intact. I cried in locked bathrooms. I pressed my hands against my stomach in terror. I considered options I never thought I would: disappearing, confessing, vanishing with the children. Nothing felt survivable. I decided to tell Edward of all of them. He seemed the most reasonable, the most humane. I planned to end the other lives quietly, one by one, with carefully constructed excuses. But life has cruel timing. Before I could act, Harold, the first man who had saved me, collapsed from a stroke. He was helpless, fragile, suddenly dependent. I couldn't abandon him then. Even after everything, leaving felt unforgivable. At 4 men pulling one secret growing inside me. I wore loose clothes, claimed weight gain, invented medical issues, even falsified documents when questions arose. Then came the accident. It was a rainy afternoon when the bus skidded on a mountain curve. Metal screamed, bodies lurched. I was thrown forward, pain tearing through my abdomen like fire. I knew instantly something was wrong. Blood, shock, darkness. When I regained partial awareness, I heard voices arguing about which hospital to take me to. Fate chose for me. They took me to the only regional hospital equipped for emergencies. The same hospital where one of the men worked. The irony was merciless. I was rushed into surgery. The baby was in distress. There was no time for explanations, no time for lies. As the anesthesia pulled me under, my last thought wasn't fear of exposure. It was fear of losing my child. When I woke, my body was empty and my secret no longer mine alone. I survived the surgery, but outside my hospital room, the 4 men I had lied to were about to meet, and my entire world was moments away from collapse. I woke to silence so heavy it felt unnatural. The room smelled of antiseptic and loss. My body ached in ways that went beyond surgery. A nurse sat beside my bed, her expression gentle but guarded. Before I could speak, she placed a hand on my arm. "Sorry," she said softly. I didn't need her to explain. The child was gone. Grief hollowed me instantly, but there was no time to process it. Footsteps echoed in the hallway, voices rising, overlapping, unfamiliar yet terrifyingly known. The Harold, pale and trembling, supported by a cane. Robert, Payson, jaw clenched. Samuel, arguing loudly with hospital staff in rapid Spanish. Edward, standing frozen, documents in his hands. 4 lives, 1 hallway, and me, exposed. The nurse tried to stop them, but chaos has a way of overpowering rules. One by one, they entered the room and the truth landed with devastating force. No introductions were needed. Harold recognized Robert instantly. Robert recognized Samuel. Edward understood everything the moment he saw them. Questions exploded. Who is he? Why does he know her? What is going on? I tried to speak, but no words came, only sobs. It was Edward who finally broke the silence. His voice was calm, terrifyingly calm. "You're married," he said. Not a question, a conclusion. I nodded. Samuel shouted. Robert slammed his fist against the wall. Harold stared at me, as if seeing a stranger. The men demanded answers, timelines, names, truths. Who told them about abandonment, about my children, about hunger, fear, violence, survival. I told them I never loved any of them the way they deserved, but I was grateful to all of them for keeping my children alive. There was silence. Afterward, not forgiveness, not understanding, just shock. Hospital security intervened before fists could fly. The men were escorted out, one by one, each carrying his own version of betrayal. Edward didn't shout. That hurt the most. He left the ring on the bedside table and walked away without looking back. The investigation that followed was brutal. Legal questions, moral judgment, paper trails, no criminal charges. Bigamy laws were complicated across counties, but the social consequences were unforgiving. Every town knew, every door closed. I lost all 4 men in a single day. When I was discharged, there was no home to return to. I moved into a small rental using my secret savings. I gathered my children and disappeared from all 4 towns. For years, I lived quietly, invisibly. The children grew. They learned fragments of the truth when they were old enough. Some understood, some didn't. and I carried the weight of it all alone. I thought losing everything was the punishment, but the final reckoning would come years later, when one unexpected visitor returned with a question I could no longer escape. Time has a strange way of softening pain without erasing it. Years passed after the hospital incident, quiet, colorless years. I moved to a town where no one knew my past. I worked honestly, lived modestly, and focused entirely on my children. I stopped running, not because I was forgiven, but because I was exhausted. My children grew into adults. They carried pieces of my secret in different ways. One refused to talk about it. One asked hard questions. One simply said, "You did what you had to do," and left it there. I never corrected them. I didn't deserve comfort. Then one winter afternoon, nearly 30 years later, there was a knock at my door. I knew the sound of that knock before I opened it. Edward stood there. Time had changed him, grayer hair, deeper lines, but his eyes were the same, calm, searching, careful. We sat in silence for a long time. Before he spoke, "I'm not here to accuse you," he said. "I'm here because I need the truth without fear this time." He told me his wife had passed years earlier. He never had children, and the child we lost, the one I never got to hold, had haunted him ever since. He wanted to know why, not the lies, not the survival logic, the truth. So I told him everything. It admitted my shame, my regret, my guilt, and I admitted something I had never said out loud. "I don't know who I would have been without desperation," I said, "and that frightens me more than what I became." Edward listened without interruption. When I finished, he stood and thanked me for honesty, not absolution. Before leaving, he asked one final question. "If you had the choice again," he said, "would you do it differently?" I didn't answer immediately. I thought of my children, live, grown, safe. "I would want to," I said, "but I don't know if I could." When he left, I realized something profound. Some sins are never forgiven, but some truths finally let you breathe. I thought that was the end, but one last truth remained untold, and it would change how my children saw me forever. I am an old woman now. My hands shake when I pour tea. My voice weakens by evening, and the past visits me more often than I invite it. When you've lived as many lives as I have, memory doesn't fade, it waits. The final reckoning didn't come from strangers' courts or former lovers. It came from my children. One summer, all three returned home together. There was an urgency in their presence, a seriousness that made my chest tighten. We sat at the same small kitchen table where I once hid money and lies. My eldest spoke first. "We know more than you think," he said. They had talked among themselves over the years, compared memories, questioned timelines, pieced together fragments of the truth I never fully shared. They weren't angry. That frightened me more than anger ever could. They wanted honesty, complete honesty, before it was too late. So I told them everything. I spoke of their father's disappearance, of hunger, of rejection, of violence, of the men who kept us alive, and the lies that kept me standing. I told them about the child I lost, their sibling, and the guilt that followed me every day after. I didn't ask for forgiveness. I didn't justify myself. I simply told the truth. When I finished, there was silence, long, heavy. My daughter reached across the table and held my hand. Yes, not absolution, not approval, acknowledgement, and that was enough. I live quietly now. I tend my small garden. I donate anonymously to shelters for women who arrive with nothing but fear and children clinging to their legs. I never tell my story there. I don't need to. This confession, this telling, is not an attempt to be understood. When society abandons women in crisis, morality becomes a luxury. Survival doesn't look noble. It looks messy, shameful, and human. I don't ask you to agree with what I did. I ask you to question the world that made it necessary. Because desperation doesn't announce itself with evil intentions. It arrives with an empty cupboard, a sick child, and no one willing to help. And when it knocks, morality doesn't always answer.